In the spring of 1854, tragedy struck the Caldwell family of Fayette County, Kentucky. Within a single month, all 7 members, spanning 3 generations, succumbed to a mysterious illness that confounded every doctor from Louisville to Cincinnati. Their symptoms were disturbingly alike: intense skin irritation that turned into festering sores, followed by high fever, delirium, and, inevitably, death. What made the calamity even more chilling was a shared connection. Each victim had been wearing garments recently tailored by the same pair of hands. Local authorities quietly closed the investigation, burying the case along with the bodies. But letters uncovered from that era have since exposed a horrifying truth, one that history deliberately concealed. The seamstress at the center of this dark tale was an enslaved woman named Dinah, and her chosen method of vengeance was as brilliant as it was deadly. Before we continue with Dinah's haunting story and the secrets of the Caldwell plantation, if you're captivated by forgotten chapters of American history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and tap that notification bell. Let us know in the comments what state you're watching from. We love hearing from those who share our fascination with these buried stories. What occurred on that Kentucky plantation would forever alter the way we understand the quiet acts of resistance within the antebellum South, where intellect and desperation intertwined to produce the most chilling forms of justice. The Caldwell plantation sprawled across 300 acres of Kentucky's finest bluegrass, about 17 miles southeast of Lexington. By 1854, it was one of Fayette County's wealthiest estates, its wide fields bursting with tobacco bound for the lucrative markets of Louisville. The main house, a grand Georgian colonial with 6 towering white columns and wraparound verandas, stood like a fortress overlooking the land it commanded. Samuel Caldwell had inherited this empire from his father in 1839, and over the next 15 years, he transformed it into one of the most profitable agricultural enterprises in central Kentucky. Beyond tobacco, Samuel managed thriving hemp fields that supplied rope and bagging across the Mississippi Valley, operated a lumber mill that processed timber from his own lands, and even ran a distillery whose bourbon reached Chicago and New Orleans. By that fateful spring, Samuel owned 57 enslaved men and women, making him one of the region's largest slaveholders. He was known as a calculating and meticulous man, treating slavery not as a moral issue, but purely as an economic one, an investment to be optimized. His peers admired his discipline and business skill, while his enslaved laborers feared his cold, unfeeling cruelty. His wife, Margaret Henley Caldwell, came from a prominent Virginia tobacco dynasty, raised to view enslaved people as refined machinery requiring maintenance and discipline. She brought 12 enslaved servants of her own into the marriage. Margaret ruled the household with the same unyielding precision Samuel brought to the fields. Also in residence was Constance Caldwell, Samuel's 74-year-old widowed mother. Though frail in body, her mind remained sharp. She had witnessed Kentucky's transformation from a wild frontier into a society built on slavery, and she clung fiercely to the old traditions of absolute authority over enslaved people. Her words still carried weight in household management, particularly in the supervision and punishment of house servants. The Caldwell children represented the continuation of this powerful legacy. Thomas, aged 22, had recently graduated from Transylvania University in Lexington, studying law and politics with ambitions to champion Kentucky's pro-slavery interests on the national stage. His sharp mind was matched by a cruel disposition that made him particularly feared by the enslaved workers. Mary Elizabeth, 20 years old and celebrated as one of the county's most desirable young women, was engaged to Jonathan Pemberton, heir to a neighboring plantation near the Kentucky River. Their planned June 1854 wedding promised to be one of the grandest social events of the year, uniting 2 of the area's most powerful families. The youngest, Samuel Jr., was 17 and already demonstrating the same calculating intelligence as his father. He spent his days studying every detail of plantation management, from soil composition and crop cycles to the psychological manipulation needed to maintain control over human labor. Also part of the household was Catherine Henley, Margaret's unmarried sister, who had moved in 2 years earlier following their father's death in Virginia. At 28, she had rejected multiple suitors to preserve her independence, yet she thrived within the Caldwell home, where she could exercise power without responsibility. Her reputation for cruelty toward house slaves was infamous, even by the harsh standards of Kentucky's planter class. The family's prosperity rested entirely upon the back-breaking work of their 57 enslaved laborers, who toiled from sunrise to sunset to maintain the operations that sustained the Caldwell fortune. Among the domestic staff, none was more talented or more indispensable than a 29-year-old woman named Dinah. Dinah's skill as a seamstress made her invaluable to the Caldwell women and the envy of neighboring estates. Her sewing was precise and artistic, her embroidery exquisite, and her designs reflected the latest fashions from Paris and New York. Visitors often remarked that the Caldwell family dressed as elegantly as the elite of Charleston or Richmond. Born on the plantation in 1825, Dinah had been trained by her mother, Ruth, who had served as the head seamstress for the previous generation of Caldwells. Ruth recognized early on that her daughter possessed an extraordinary intellect and evening, an itching along her neck and wrists that she dismissed as a reaction to the fabric. By nightfall, however, the irritation had worsened into a violent rash marked by blistering sores. The family physician was summoned at once, diagnosing it as an allergic reaction and prescribing ointments that provided no relief. Within 48 hours, Margaret developed a high fever and delirium. By the end of the week, she was bedridden, her skin mottled with lesions that no known remedy could soothe. The Caldwells were horrified, but believed the illness to be an isolated misfortune. Dinah maintained her usual composure, expressing genuine concern and continuing her duties with unwavering diligence. She attended to Margaret's needs, offering cool compresses and clean linens, an act that masked the quiet satisfaction stirring within her heart. Her first test had succeeded perfectly, and suspicion was nowhere near her. Encouraged by the results, Dinah moved to the second phase of her plan. She began preparing garments for Thomas Caldwell, whose wardrobe required updates for his frequent trips to Lexington. For him, she chose fine shirts of imported cotton, sewing their collars and cuffs with threads treated in a subtler, slower-acting mixture, derived from pokeweed sap and the extracts of jimsonweed, a plant known for its hallucinogenic and toxic properties. By late March, Thomas began to complain of persistent itching and headaches, symptoms he attributed to stress or the early spring air. But within days, his condition deteriorated, his eyes reddened, his thoughts became scattered, and his skin erupted in angry sores. The doctor was summoned again, baffled by what seemed to be a contagion of unknown origin. Samuel, ever pragmatic, ordered the servants to scrub and disinfect every surface of the house, certain that filth was to blame. Dinah continued her work without hesitation. Every task she performed was done with the precision of a scientist and the calm of someone who had accepted her fate. Each stitch carried purpose, each garment a weapon cloaked in beauty. She was careful to vary her methods, adjusting the mixtures to prevent patterns that might raise suspicion. By early April, the disease spread through the household like a curse. Samuel Caldwell himself fell ill after wearing a freshly tailored waistcoat that Dinah had carefully reinforced with poisoned stitching along the inner seams. He endured agonizing days of fever and madness, shouting incoherently about betrayal and witchcraft before his body finally gave out. One by one, every member of the family succumbed. Constance, the matriarch, who had mocked the suffering of her kin as divine punishment for their moral failings, was next. Her decline was slow and dreadful. She lingered for nearly a week, her once commanding voice reduced to hoarse whispers. Catherine Henley, ever cruel and disdainful, collapsed while dressing for an afternoon visit, the contact of her corset against her poisoned skin delivering the fatal dose. The servants whispered among themselves, terrified and confused, but none dared speak against Dinah. She played her role flawlessly, grieving, praying, and serving, while secretly ensuring that her plan unfolded without interruption. By mid-April, the Caldwell mansion had become a house of death. The three remaining children, Thomas, Mary Elizabeth, and Samuel Jungarv, were all struck down within days of each other. Mary Elizabeth, preparing for her long-anticipated wedding, had insisted on wearing a delicate gown Dinah had recently completed. The gown's lace collar, treated with a milder toxin that built up slowly in the bloodstream, ensured that her suffering would stretch over several days before the end. When the final burial took place, the plantation stood eerily quiet. The fields were untended, the grand house shuttered. The doctors, unable to explain the tragedy, blamed bad air or tainted water. The authorities quickly sealed the matter, preferring to protect the reputation of one of Kentucky's most prominent families. Dinah remained outwardly calm. She continued her work for several weeks after the last funeral, knowing that suspicion would eventually turn toward her. But no one ever connected the elegant garments to the deaths. When the estate was finally sold off, Dinah was transferred to another household, vanishing from records soon after. It wasn't until decades later, when a series of letters were discovered hidden inside a false panel of a sewing chest, once belonging to Margaret Caldwell, that the truth emerged. Among them were pages written in a careful, educated hand, Dinah's own, detailing her formulas, methods, and the motives behind her revenge. Her words ended with a haunting reflection. They taught me to sew beauty, but I learned to stitch death. They thought me silent, yet every thread I wove was a word unspoken, a testament to those who suffered without voice. The Caldwell tragedy remains one of the most chilling examples of quiet rebellion in the antebellum South. A story of intelligence, endurance, and vengeance hidden behind the veil of servitude. Dinah's legacy, though buried by history, stands as a dark reminder of how knowledge, even forbidden, can become the most powerful weapon of all. Neighbors, merchants, and plantation staff, but found nothing to support Samuel's suspicions. Every account pointed to a family cursed by misfortune rather than targeted by any tangible enemy. Meanwhile, the illnesses continued to spread through the household, growing more horrific by the day. Margaret's once flawless complexion was now permanently marred by deep, unhealed scars. Her hands trembled constantly, her voice reduced to a whisper. Samuel Jr. drifted in and out of feverish delirium, his breathing shallow, his strength fading despite constant attention. And far away in Frankfort, Thomas Caldwell's condition had worsened beyond recovery. His physicians, unable to explain the chemical burns covering his neck, chest, and arms, could only ease his pain with laudanum until he finally succumbed to what they described as a wasting affliction of unknown origin. The news of Thomas's death reached the Caldwell plantation on April 21st. The message struck Samuel like a thunderclap. He raged through the mansion, shouting accusations at servants, at the doctor, even at God himself. He was certain that his enemies in the abolitionist movement had found a way to strike at him through poison or witchcraft. His fury was uncontrollable. He ordered new locks on the storage rooms, demanded that every servant be searched, and forbade anyone from leaving the estate. But no explanation could bridge the widening gap between superstition and science. Through all of this, Dinah remained composed. Her demeanor reflected the same disciplined calm that had long made her indispensable to the household. She continued her sewing, quietly fulfilling requests for mourning clothes and linens for the sick rooms. Her ability to appear dutiful, sympathetic, and indispensable allowed her to move freely through the house without suspicion. When Samuel demanded new black suits to wear for Thomas's funeral, Dinah worked day and night to complete them, using once again her lethal threads soaked in toxic mixtures refined from her growing collection of poisonous plants. Samuel's suit became her next instrument of vengeance. She had calculated the blend carefully, combining extracts from pokeweed, jimsonweed, and poison sumac into a formula strong enough to penetrate the skin without immediately revealing its effects. When Samuel dressed for the funeral on April 24th, he commented on how tightly the collar fit around his neck. By evening, red welts had appeared beneath his shirt collar and along his wrists. By the following day, the sores had blistered and ruptured, filling the air with the same sickly odor that had marked Margaret's infection weeks earlier. Dr. Beaumont was once again summoned, but his remedies were useless. The physician had begun to suspect something unnatural, but his understanding of toxicology was limited to known poisons like arsenic and mercury, substances that left visible residues. What he was witnessing defied every explanation. As Samuel's condition deteriorated, the household descended into chaos. Servants whispered of curses and vengeful spirits, while Margaret spent her days weeping over her husband's bed, her own health too fragile to allow her to care for him. Dinah continued to serve quietly, bringing water, fresh linens, and bandages, her face a mask of devotion concealing the fierce resolve within her. By May 1st, Samuel Caldwell was dead. His final days were marked by fever, violent tremors, and madness. He ranted incoherently about invisible enemies and divine punishment, his words echoing through the grand halls of the once proud estate. After Samuel's death, the plantation fell into silence. The once flourishing fields went untended, and the great house grew dark and cold. Within a matter of weeks, Mary Elizabeth and Samuel Gida both succumbed to the same agonizing illness that had claimed their parents and brother. Dr. Beaumont recorded each case meticulously, filling his journals with notes that he hoped might someday be understood. He wrote of lesions that began at points of friction, collars, cuffs, seams, and spread rapidly despite every treatment he could devise. His observations hinted at a pattern, but the connection to the garments remained a mystery he would never solve. When the final member of the Caldwell family was buried in June of 1854, the estate passed into legal confusion. The courts in Lexington appointed trustees to settle the family's debts and divide what remained among distant relatives. The enslaved people were dispersed to neighboring plantations or sold at auction. Dinah's name appeared on one of the sale lists, recorded simply as female seamstress, age 29, skilled, obedient. No further record of her life exists, but nearly 50 years later, in 1903, a chest was discovered during the renovation of the long, abandoned Caldwell house. Inside were scraps of fabric, small jars containing dark residues, and a bundle of letters written in a careful, practiced hand. The letters, believed to have been written by Dinah herself, described her methods in chilling detail, the plant mixtures, the experiments, and the precise stitching patterns she used to ensure maximum effect. One final note, written in the same delicate script, read, "They taught me to serve with my hands, so I served them death with the same skill. Each stitch I sewed was a prayer for those who had no voice. Justice comes not in fury, but in patience." The Caldwell tragedy remains one of the most haunting and unrecorded acts of resistance from the antebellum South. An invisible rebellion stitched quietly beneath the seams of history. Neighbors, business partners, and political allies were all questioned, yet no evidence emerged of any outside threat. Investigators examined the family's meals, their water sources, and every household product they could access, testing each for traces of poison. This focus on external enemies offered Dinah perfect cover to continue her deadly work undisturbed. She watched their efforts with quiet satisfaction, aware that their failure to uncover an outside cause would soon force them to turn their investigation inward, toward the plantation itself. Still, she trusted that her established reputation for loyalty and efficiency would shield her from immediate suspicion, at least until all other theories had been exhausted. During this tense period of suspicion and fear, Dinah made her boldest move yet. She began creating new garments for the remaining family members who had not yet succumbed to her toxic craftsmanship. Elderly Constance, Catherine, and Samuel Caldwell himself. These garments were the culmination of everything she had learned, perfected through months of observation and experimentation, about precise dosages, timing, and the most effective means of administering her plant-based toxins. The psychological strain of maintaining her facade as a loyal servant while carrying out her secret mission was beginning to wear her down. Subtle shifts in her behavior hinted at the growing pressure within her, changes that a more perceptive master might have noticed. But the increasingly paranoid and self-absorbed Caldwell family remained blind to her unraveling composure. Dinah's long-planned vengeance was entering its riskiest stage. The investigators' inability to find any external culprit meant their attention would soon turn inward, to those who served the Caldwells most faithfully. As April turned into May, Dr. Beaumont, now desperate for answers, reached out to medical colleagues across the country, seeking any case studies that might shed light on the Caldwell family's bizarre illness. Letters later preserved in the American Medical Association archives reveal a man pushed to the edge of his understanding, searching for explanations that seemed to defy conventional science. On April 28th, Dr. Marcus Webb from the University of Louisville Medical School arrived at the plantation, bringing primitive toxicology tools and a more structured scientific method. His analysis of tissue samples and fabric fragments marked the first serious attempt to identify the substance responsible for the poisonings. Though limited by the crude chemical techniques of 1854, Webb's findings validated Dr. Beaumont's suspicions. The family was being deliberately poisoned through plant-based toxins embedded in their clothing. Webb detected organic compounds that were clearly harmful, but he lacked the means to determine their precise botanical origins or to comprehend the advanced preparation methods Dinah employed. The arrival of scientific investigators created a new atmosphere of fear across the plantation. The enslaved community understood all too well that, if one of their own were implicated, punishment would be collective, possibly involving executions or forced sale to brutal plantations deeper in the South. Samuel Caldwell's paranoia evolved accordingly. His focus shifted from imagined outside foes to the unsettling possibility that his household had been infiltrated by an internal enemy. The systematic pattern of the poisonings, targeting only family members and sparing the enslaved, suggested insider knowledge of daily habits and private routines. More disturbingly, the method of delivery required close access to the family's garments, implicating someone who handled their personal belongings regularly. On May 1st, Sheriff Benjamin Hargrove of Fayette County arrived, accompanied by federal marshals investigating similar poisoning cases in nearby regions. Their presence transformed what had been a medical enigma into an active criminal inquiry, one that would eventually uncover the most intricate murder plot in Kentucky's antebellum history. At first, Sheriff Hargrove focused on Caldwell's persistent claims of outside conspirators. But his deputy James Fletcher, more seasoned in criminal matters, began to notice troubling inconsistencies. The targeted selection of victims, the familiarity with their wardrobes, and the sophisticated botanical knowledge all indicated that the culprit was someone inside the household. Someone deeply familiar with both the family and the local plants. Through it all, Dinah sustained her mask of calm devotion. She went about her duties as usual, offering sympathy and obedience, while subtly monitoring the investigators' progress. Yet among the enslaved, her behavior did not go unnoticed. Solomon Wright, a 73-year-old slave who tended the plantation's herb garden, began to grow suspicious. His decades of experience with medicinal and toxic plants gave him a unique insight. He had observed Dinah collecting particular herbs over the past year, plants he knew to be dangerous, always claiming they were for dyeing fabrics or preparing remedies for the slave quarters. Solomon started noticing the timing of her foraging trips and realized they often coincided with the family's worsening conditions. Though he harbored no affection for the Caldwells, who had subjected him and others to years of cruelty, he was tormented by a moral dilemma. Exposing Dinah could doom the entire enslaved community, yet remaining silent might bring even greater catastrophe once the truth inevitably came to light. His inner conflict mirrored the impossible choices faced by many enslaved people in the antebellum South, caught between quiet resistance, survival, and the looming threat of collective punishment for the actions of one. Kentucky in 1854 was a land where even the faintest whisper of rebellion among enslaved people could spark widespread terror and bloodshed. Entire communities might be wiped out, punished for crimes they neither knew of nor committed. Solomon understood this grim reality all too well. The white authorities would not pause to separate guilt from innocence if they suspected any coordinated uprising or poisoning plot. His knowledge had become both a burden and a trap. He faced an agonizing dilemma: remain silent and become complicit in further deaths, or speak out and condemn countless innocent people to brutal reprisals. His torment reflected the cruel moral paradox that slavery imposed a system designed to crush both body and conscience by forcing impossible choices between survival, justice, and loyalty. Meanwhile, Dinah advanced into the final phase of her meticulously planned vengeance. With unshakable precision, she completed garments for the 3 remaining members of the Caldwell family who had not yet fallen to her toxic craft: elderly Constance, Catherine, and Samuel himself. Each piece was a calculated weapon disguised as clothing, hidden carefully in places where it would be discovered and worn without arousing suspicion. For the frail and aging Constance, Dinah designed a morning gown with collars and sleeves treated with a slower but far more potent blend of plant toxins. She knew the woman's weakened body would succumb gradually, ensuring prolonged agony. For Samuel Caldwell, she created a vest that embodied her deadliest formula, crafted to kill swiftly. The inner seams were lined with threads steeped repeatedly in concentrated poison to guarantee fatal contact once worn. But the corset prepared for Catherine was the most personal act of vengeance. Catherine's cruelty toward the house slaves had earned her a punishment of particular cruelty. Dinah tailored the corset to inflict severe burns and visible lesions, ensuring her suffering would be undeniable to all who saw her. These final acts demanded increasing boldness. To access the family's private quarters and storage rooms, Dinah relied on her status as head seamstress and her deep familiarity with household routines. Every movement had to appear innocent. Each visit to retrieve or deliver garments was masked as ordinary labor. But among those who knew her best, subtle changes had become evident. Her demeanor had grown unnervingly calm, her eyes distant, as though she had transcended fear itself. The enslaved people who worked beside her sensed that Dinah had crossed a threshold from mere survival into something resolute and irreversible. Ruth, her mother and the former head seamstress, recognized the signs immediately. She had seen the same quiet detachment in others who had reached the end of endurance. Those who had chosen defiance over submission, even at the cost of their lives. Ruth understood that her daughter had accepted her fate and was determined to complete her mission, no matter the outcome. The atmosphere on the Caldwell plantation became almost unbearable as May unfolded. Suspicion hung in the air, mingling with the faint scent of medicines and decay. On May 8th, the fragile balance finally collapsed. Mary Elizabeth suffered a violent relapse after wearing one of her older dresses. Dr. Webb's examination confirmed the worst. This garment, too, had been treated with plant-based toxins. The poisoner was still active, still operating with intimate access to the household's possessions. Sheriff Hargrove immediately ordered the plantation sealed off. No one could leave. Every enslaved person was confined, interrogated, and searched. Investigators tore through the main house, examining each article of clothing for traces of tampering. What they uncovered shocked even the seasoned sheriff. Hidden among wardrobes, linen chests and closets were garments laced with deadly compounds, evidence of a methodical campaign of murder rather than an isolated act of revenge. Dr. Webb's analysis of these garments revealed at least 7 distinct toxic plants combined in intricate ways that enhanced their potency exponentially. The formulas displayed a level of chemical understanding far beyond what any enslaved person was presumed capable of, rivaling the expertise of trained chemists of the day. Dinah's ingenuity, her ability to harness nature's poisons with such precision, astonished the investigators even as it horrified them. But Dinah had anticipated discovery. She had prepared a final act that would ensure her story lived on long after her capture. On May 9th, a full-scale search of the Caldwell mansion exposed the complete scale of her operation. Toxic garments were discovered hidden with deliberate care, each tailored for a specific victim, each representing a unique experiment in dosage and composition. Beneath the loose floorboards of Dinah's quarters, investigators found notebooks, pages filled with careful observations, plant sketches, and recorded trials. The writings demonstrated a scientific intellect that rivaled that of contemporary scholars, blending botanical knowledge with methodical experimentation. Sheriff Hargrove's interrogations that followed were merciless. His men sought to identify accomplices among the enslaved workers, using threats and violence to extract confessions from people who had neither power nor protection. Yet the truth soon became clear: Dinah had acted entirely on her own. None of the others had known. Her secret had been guarded with such discipline that even those who worked beside her daily remained unaware. Her silence and skill had preserved the illusion of innocence until the very end, and ensured that when the truth finally emerged, it would shake the very foundations of Kentucky's antebellum society. Her ability to continue her daily work, while secretly preparing her lethal materials, displayed an extraordinary level of psychological control, an emotional partitioning that had been forged through years of surviving under the brutal weight of slavery. Yet it was Solomon Wright's awareness of Dinah's plant, collecting habits, and his own deep knowledge of toxic botany that would ultimately unravel the mystery. His decision to testify did not come easily. It was only when he became certain that Dinah would face execution regardless of what he said, and that keeping silent might allow further deaths among the remaining Caldwells, that he finally chose to reveal the truth. Solomon's testimony exposed the astonishing extent of Dinah's preparation. For more than a year, she had carefully gathered poisonous plants during their peak seasons, refining her techniques for extracting and preserving their deadly essences. She conducted systematic experiments, testing combinations of toxins under the guise of dyeing fabrics or creating herbal medicines. Solomon explained how Dinah had spoken to him in cryptic terms about repaying the Caldwells for their cruelty, describing in detail how she might use her needlework as a means of retribution. At the time, He believed she was speaking in frustrated imagination, never realizing she intended to turn her words into reality. Dr. Webb's subsequent analysis of Dinah's methods confirmed that her innovations far surpassed the scientific understanding of her time. She had devised a way to bond poisonous compounds directly to fabric fibers, rendering them invisible yet potent for months. Her grasp of how toxins absorbed through the skin and circulated in the body reflected knowledge that even trained physicians of the 1850s would have struggled to match. When investigators discovered Dinah's journals, they uncovered not merely a record of her techniques, but a chilling insight into her mind. Her writings showed that her motives extended beyond personal vengeance. She envisioned her actions as a symbolic strike against the institution of slavery itself. She believed that the mysterious and horrifying deaths of a prominent slaveholding family would send ripples of fear across Kentucky and the neighboring states, forcing slave owners to confront the vulnerability of their own households. Despite being denied formal education, Dinah's writings displayed remarkable political awareness. She understood that isolated acts of defiance rarely changed oppressive systems, but terror and uncertainty could. Her goal was not only to punish the Caldwells, but to make their suffering a message. If fear took root in the hearts of slaveholders, perhaps they would temper their cruelty or question their own power. Her notes also revealed the deep personal losses that had fueled her descent into vengeance: the sale of her younger brother, the looming threat of her daughter being sold away, and years of watching beatings, humiliation, and death among her people. Those experiences had stripped away any remaining hope for mercy or reform. Her transformation, from victim to avenger, was both terrifying and tragic. A portrait of a woman who had turned the tools of her oppression into instruments of retribution. Psychological experts who later reviewed her writings described her as exhibiting split consciousness, able to perform the role of obedient servant while harboring a cold, methodical purpose. Even hardened investigators admitted a grudging admiration for her discipline and intellect. Sheriff Hargrove ordered Dinah's arrest on May 10th, taking extraordinary precautions. His men feared traps or accomplices, uncertain what other dangers might remain. Dinah offered no resistance. Her calm composure unsettled those who expected either hysteria or pleading. When questioned, she responded with poise and clarity, acknowledging the investigators' questions, but neither confirming nor denying her guilt. Her measured tone, sharp intellect, and understanding of legal procedure astonished the officers present. Though she had no rights under the law, she spoke as if she understood them intimately. What disturbed her interrogators most was her demeanor when told that 3 members of the Caldwell family were already dead. Dinah showed no sign of remorse or even satisfaction, only curiosity. Her sole question was whether the remaining victims had yet suffered the same fate. As questioning continued, investigators realized that Dinah had designed her plan with extraordinary precision. Each phase of her campaign was timed to instill the greatest psychological torment, forcing the Caldwells to live under the same suffocating fear that enslaved people endured daily. She wanted them to taste helplessness. Further examination of her workshop revealed stockpiles of treated fabric and concentrated toxins, enough to continue killing for months after her death. Dinah had anticipated discovery. She had hidden caches throughout the plantation, ensuring that her vengeance could persist even in her absence. The full search uncovered her contingency plans, carefully outlined in her notes. Each accounted for different scenarios: discovery, partial success, or total destruction of the Caldwell line. Every outcome was designed to maximize pain and confusion. Her level of foresight, strategy, and chemical sophistication left even her captors stunned. But perhaps the most chilling revelation came last. Evidence suggested that Dinah's campaign was not entirely isolated. Sheriff Hargrove's team uncovered fragments of correspondence and references in her notes that hinted at similar acts of defiance across Kentucky's slaveholding regions. These clues pointed to a broader pattern of covert resistance, an unspoken network of enslaved individuals exchanging knowledge about plants, poisons, and silent rebellion. What had begun as the story of one woman's vengeance now appeared to be part of something far greater, a hidden war of intellect and endurance fought within the shadows of bondage, where knowledge itself had become a weapon against oppression. More chilling was Dinah's calm and precise explanation of how such pain had hardened into purpose. She told Margaret that each humiliation, each act of cruelty she had endured, had become another reason to perfect her craft, not for beauty or service, but for justice as she understood it. Her words carried no malice, only an unnerving certainty. She described how every thread she sewed had become part of a larger design, not just to avenge herself, but to strike fear into those who believed themselves untouchable. Witnesses to the exchange later recalled the eerie composure with which Dinah spoke, her tone resembling that of a teacher explaining a lesson rather than a criminal confessing to murder. When Margaret asked whether she felt any remorse for the deaths of innocent family members, Dinah replied that innocence was a privilege the Caldwell family had long denied others. Her statement silenced the room and reportedly caused one of the younger deputies to leave in tears. The confrontation left Margaret visibly shaken. She later told investigators that what disturbed her most was not Dinah's cruelty, but her calm conviction that she had acted logically and justifiably. To the enslaved woman, revenge had not been an act of madness. It was the inevitable conclusion of a system built on suffering. Following the confrontation, federal investigators intensified their efforts to uncover the extent of the network Dinah's letters had suggested. Agents from Louisville and Cincinnati began examining plantation records, slave inventories, and trade routes in search of evidence linking similar deaths across the region. Reports of sudden illnesses, unexplained skin lesions, and mysterious deaths among slaveholding families began surfacing in alarming numbers. Each new case bore the same hallmarks: garments sewn by enslaved women, sudden symptoms after wearing freshly made clothes, and no traceable medical explanation. Dr. Webb's continuing laboratory studies of the recovered materials deepened the investigators' unease. He concluded that Dinah's process for binding plant toxins to fibers was so advanced that even trained chemists of the day would have struggled to reproduce it. Her poisons, once absorbed through the skin, acted slowly, giving the appearance of natural illness while ensuring eventual death. This delayed effect had made it nearly impossible for previous victims to identify the source of their affliction, allowing the pattern to persist undetected for years. By mid-May, newspapers in Louisville, Lexington, and even St. Louis were reporting on what they described as the seamstress conspiracy, blending fact with sensational speculation. Some journalists suggested that entire communities of enslaved people were preparing similar acts of rebellion through poisoned clothing. Panic spread through the Upper South, with many plantation owners ordering the immediate destruction of all garments made by enslaved seamstresses. In response, state authorities called for emergency meetings to restore order. Militia patrols were expanded, and new laws were proposed to restrict access to certain plants and dyes. But these measures only deepened tensions. For the enslaved population, Dinah became both a warning and a legend, a woman who had weaponized the very skills her captors had forced upon her. In the weeks that followed, her calm defiance during questioning became the stuff of whispered stories among the enslaved. Some said she smiled when told she would hang. Others claimed she promised that her work would outlive her. Sheriff Hargrove, in his final report, admitted that despite exhaustive searches, they could not be certain they had found all of her hidden caches. Even months later, field hands and house servants continued to discover scraps of treated fabric buried in outbuildings and garden beds, as if Dinah's vengeance had woven itself into the soil of the Caldwell plantation. To the authorities, she remained a murderer. But to many who suffered under slavery, her name became something else entirely, a symbol of resistance, intelligence, and the terrible price of freedom denied, but arrived to find that Judge Beaumont had already passed away during the night, his death attributed to what physicians described as progressive organ failure. When federal investigators examined the remains, they discovered the same unmistakable signs of toxic deterioration found on the bodies of the Caldwell family. This confirmation left no doubt. Dinah's reach had extended well beyond the confines of a single plantation. Her vengeance had struck into the very heart of Kentucky's slaveholding elite. Her calm explanation of how she had turned the Caldwell family's vanity against them revealed the depth of her psychological insight. She explained that she had understood, from years of observation, that their obsession with status and appearance would make them eager to display the fine garments she crafted. What they could not imagine, she said, was that their pride and arrogance would become the very tools of their destruction. The precision of her reasoning, her ability to weaponize her oppressors' social habits, astonished even the most hardened investigators. The psychological profile assembled from these interrogations painted Dinah as a woman who had undergone a complete metamorphosis, from victim to hunter, from servant to strategist. The same skills that had once kept her alive under bondage, patience, obedience, and precision, had evolved into instruments of deadly retribution. Her calm, almost detached demeanor as she detailed each phase of her plan left her captors both horrified and awestruck. Then came the news that shattered what little composure remained among the investigators: Thomas Caldwell's death in Frankfurt. He had collapsed at a political rally, his body racked by unbearable pain. Physicians could do nothing. The toxins sewn into his ceremonial suit had already begun their fatal work. The agony lasted for days before death finally claimed him. When word reached the plantation on May 14th, Dinah's expression betrayed no emotion, only a quiet finality. In her private notes, later recovered from her cell, she had described Thomas Caldwell as her Keystone, the symbolic center of her revenge. His death was not merely personal, it was political. As an advocate for expanding slavery into new territories, his demise, staged at a pro-slavery rally, was a calculated act meant to echo far beyond his own family's tragedy. Dr. Webb's final report on Dinah's toxic preparations stunned the scientific community. Her methods of concentrating and stabilizing botanical poisons were decades ahead of their time. Techniques that would not be formally documented in medical journals until the 1870s. She had developed a process for chemically binding toxins to fabric threads that allowed them to remain potent for months, even after washing or exposure to sunlight. These findings challenged every contemporary assumption about the intellectual and scientific limitations imposed on enslaved people. But the law in Kentucky was unwavering. For an enslaved person convicted of murdering their owner, there could be only one punishment: death by hanging, often preceded by public torture meant to deter others. Dinah's execution was set for May 20th, giving authorities less than a week to extract what information they could about the alleged wider conspiracy. Yet, despite endless interrogations, she revealed nothing further. Her composure remained absolute, an unnerving mixture of dignity and quiet defiance. 2 days before her scheduled execution, on the morning of May 18th, Dinah made a final request that stunned everyone present. She asked to be taken to the Caldwell family crypt to examine the bodies of those who had died from her poisoned garments. She claimed she possessed critical information about additional victims, details that could only be verified through direct inspection of the corpses. Marshall Henderson was convinced it was a ploy to delay her death, but Dr. Webb argued that her intimate understanding of the toxins might provide insights to prevent future attacks. Reluctantly, permission was granted. The examination took place inside the cold, stone-walled crypt where the bodies of Thomas, Mary Elizabeth, and Samuel Junder lay awaiting burial. Dinah moved among the coffins with the detached precision of a scientist rather than the fear of a condemned woman. She studied each corpse with a chilling calmness, pointing out patterns of skin decay and internal discoloration that corresponded to her various experiments. Each victim, she explained, had been targeted with a specific formulation. Thomas with a fast-acting systemic toxin designed to ensure his death even under medical care, Mary Elizabeth with compounds that destroyed reproductive organs, denying her the ability to bear hairs, and Samuel Junder with a mixture engineered to prolong agony and induce delirium before death. Then came her final revelation, the detail that horrified even the most hardened investigators. Dinah calmly stated that the Caldwell family had not been her only victims. Her campaign had extended to others complicit in the machinery of enslavement. Among them was Judge Harrison Beaumont, brother of Dr. Beaumont and the very man who had overseen numerous court proceedings that tore enslaved families apart. 3 months earlier, the Caldwell family had presented him with a new judicial robe, one sewn by Dinah herself. What no one had known was that its threads had been soaked in a slow, acting poison designed to mimic the symptoms of age and exhaustion. When investigators sent a courier to Lexington to verify her claim, they arrived too late. Judge Beaumont had died the previous evening. Physicians attributed his death to natural causes. But when Dr. Webb's team examined samples of the robe, the results confirmed Dinah's chilling confession. The same botanical toxins that had killed the Caldwells were woven into the very fabric he had worn on the bench. The realization that her reach had extended into the judiciary sent shockwaves through Kentucky's slave-holding elite. What had begun as a single act of revenge had become the symbol of an unseen rebellion. Intelligent, patient, and merciless. And as investigators looked into her final notes, one haunting question remained: how many more garments, hidden and forgotten, still carried her deadly signature? Over 30 cases of unexplained deaths and illnesses across Kentucky, Tennessee, and southern Ohio that bore the same toxicological signature as Dinah's work. Cases that had long been dismissed as coincidence, disease, or divine punishment. Her influence, investigators realized, had spread like a contagion of ideas, invisible, undetectable, and unstoppable. The discovery of hidden correspondence, coded recipes, and patterns of plant gathering among enslaved seamstresses across the region revealed that her innovations had taken root in the minds of others long before her capture. Dinah had not merely sought vengeance, she had planted a philosophy. Even in death, her legacy continued to unravel the foundations of the system that had created her. In the weeks following her execution, panic spread among plantation owners. Clothing sewn by enslaved hands was burned in public bonfires. Seamstresses were sold or executed without trial. Merchants refused to purchase homespun garments from Kentucky's interior counties, fearing contamination. In Louisville and Frankfort, tailors reported a surge in demand for northern-made suits, the only garments slaveholders now trusted to touch their skin. Dr. Webb's final report to federal authorities, classified for nearly half a century, as she came to be recorded in legal documents, had orchestrated a campaign of chemical and psychological warfare unprecedented in modern times. He wrote that her scientific sophistication surpasses that of most contemporary physicians, and that her methods revealed a mind of rare discipline and foresight, operating under the constraints of bondage. His recommendation that her surviving notes be preserved, for study rather than destruction, was ignored. Most of her journals were ordered burned under military supervision, though a few copies, transcribed by abolitionist sympathizers within the investigation, would later resurface in the archives of the Freedmen's Bureau after the Civil War. As for the Caldwell plantation itself, it never recovered. Within a year, its remaining family members sold the estate and relocated to Virginia. The house stood abandoned by the 1860s, its reputation haunted not by ghosts but by memory, by whispers of the enslaved woman who had turned a needle and thread into instruments of rebellion. Local legend held that her spirit lingered in the workshop where she once sewed, that the scent of bitter herbs could still be detected on humid summer nights. Historians would later debate the true extent of Dinah's network. Some argued that her campaign had been largely solitary, her influence exaggerated by terrified whites desperate to rationalize a collapse in control. Others maintained that she had indeed founded one of the earliest organized resistance movements in the American South. A covert, intellectual insurgency waged not with swords or fire, but with intellect, patience, and poison. Whatever the truth, her name survived where most of her contemporaries did not. Fragments of her story appeared in suppressed newspaper archives, in whispered family lore, and in abolitionist tracts published in Boston and Philadelphia under titles such as The Seamstress's Justice and Threads of Vengeance. And yet, perhaps her most enduring legacy was the fear she left behind, the awareness that knowledge, once awakened, could never again be fully enslaved. In the end, Dinah's story was not simply one of murder or rebellion, but of transformation. She had turned the tools of her servitude, needle, thread, and silence, into weapons of revolution. Her final act on the gallows was not just to die, but to speak truth so piercing that it would echo for generations. "You made us tools," she said, "and we learned to cut." He had passed away 2 days earlier from what his doctor identified as heart failure. Jonathan Pitton, the fiancé of Mary Elizabeth and heir to the plantation neighboring the Caldwell estate along the Kentucky River, had also received articles of clothing from the Caldwell family during his courtship. Dinah later confessed that she had secretly treated several of his garments with toxic plant-based substances meant to cause sterility and, eventually, death, ensuring that no future generation of slaveholders would come from the union of the two wealthy families. Investigators discovered that Jonathan had been suffering from symptoms similar to those that had afflicted the Caldwells, but had dismissed them as stress brought on by grief over his fiancée's illness and death. Dr. Webb's analysis of his wardrobe confirmed the presence of the same toxins that had killed the Caldwells, though in smaller, slower, acting doses meant to pass unnoticed. Even more alarming was Dinah's admission that she had prepared treated garments for a number of influential pro-slavery politicians and businessmen who attended social gatherings and political meetings at the Caldwell estate. Her status as an exceptionally skilled seamstress had given her access to individuals of great influence, allowing her to extend her quiet campaign of assassination far beyond the walls of her owner's home. As the investigation deepened, authorities realized that Dinah had used the Caldwell family's social prominence and her own trusted reputation to reach the very core of Kentucky's pro-slavery elite. The beautiful, handcrafted garments she gifted to visiting dignitaries had, in truth, become weapons of political destruction spread across the region's ruling class. Dr. Webb's research into her methods revealed that Dinah had developed a variety of toxin mixtures tailored to specific results. Some formulas were designed to kill swiftly and dramatically, sowing fear among slaveholding families, while others acted gradually, disguising the deaths as natural misfortunes. Her written notes spoke of a final phase, a coordinated strike against multiple targets meant to plunge Kentucky's plantation society into chaos. The timing, set for the 1854 congressional elections, suggested a strategic awareness far beyond mere revenge. Her goal was to cripple the political structure that upheld slavery itself. The depth of her planning astonished investigators. It became clear that Dinah's motives were not driven only by personal suffering, but by a calculated effort to destabilize the very systems that maintained bondage. Her insight into the political connections among slaveholders revealed an intellect and strategic understanding that directly contradicted the racist assumptions of her time. Sheriff Hargrove's wider investigation across central Kentucky uncovered further evidence of Dinah's far-reaching campaign. Similar unexplained deaths among other prominent families mirrored her methods, suggesting that her acts of resistance were part of a broader, organized effort. The growing list of victims sent shock waves through the plantation aristocracy. Governor Lazarus Powell responded by declaring martial law in 5 counties and ordering military searches of plantation estates for signs of slave uprisings. Federal agents joined the effort, tracing related cases into neighboring states. They discovered a troubling pattern: mysterious illnesses and deaths among slaveholding elites consistent with Dinah's poison techniques. Evidence indicated that knowledge of her methods had spread among literate enslaved networks, revealing a level of organization that white authorities had never suspected. The revelation shattered confidence in the supposed security of the slave system. Slaveholders became consumed by paranoia, realizing that those who dressed them, laundered their clothes, or served their food might also be capable of quietly killing them. Yet through it all, Dinah displayed no remorse. She faced her approaching death with the same calm determination that had marked her every action. On the night before her execution, May 19, 1854, she gave one final statement, words that would echo across generations and expose the moral rot at the heart of slavery. Before a crowd of more than 200 plantation owners, officials, and spectators gathered the next day, Dinah spoke from the gallows. "You have taught us that human beings can be owned, that families can be torn apart for your gain, that a child's life can be priced and sold. I have only used your lessons to show you what it means to be powerless beneath cruelty." Her speech, recorded by journalists and officials but later suppressed, would eventually resurface as one of the most profound articulations of resistance in American history. Her clarity and composure challenged the very ideologies that sought to justify her enslavement. Following her death, investigators continued to uncover the extent of her influence. Dr. Webb identified at least a dozen prominent families killed by methods identical to Dinah's, while federal records pointed to 30 or more similar deaths across the South. The revelations shook the foundation of plantation society and forced white authorities to confront a horrifying truth. Their entire system depended on the trust of people they had enslaved, and that trust was now irreparably broken. The psychological impact was immense. Plantation households across Kentucky dismissed enslaved seamstresses who had long served them, turning instead to factory-made garments from the North. Fear replaced familiarity, disrupting the fragile social balance that had sustained slavery for generations. Solomon Wright, the elderly enslaved man whose testimony had exposed Dinah's activities, lived 3 more years before dying in 1857. Among his people he remained a divisive figure. Some saw him as a betrayer, others as a man who had tried to prevent further bloodshed. His story reflected the impossible moral choices that slavery forced upon its victims. The Caldwell family, meanwhile, never recovered. Samuel Caldwell, haunted by the deaths of his relatives, sold the plantation in 1856 and fled to California. Margaret Caldwell lived until 1859, her body scarred and her mind shattered by betrayal. Her sister Catherine survived, but was left permanently incapacitated, while the family matriarch, Constance Caldwell, passed away only 2 weeks after Dinah's execution. The once grand plantation decayed into ruin, its cursed reputation keeping it deserted for decades. Webb's documentation of Dinah's toxin techniques later advanced the study of toxicology, influencing medical science and forensic investigation. Her methods, though born of desperation and vengeance, indirectly contributed to future knowledge about poison detection and prevention. Despite government suppression, whispers of her story spread through enslaved communities. Even after her death, mysterious illnesses continued to strike plantation owners, though none were ever as meticulously executed as hers. Historians now recognize Dinah's campaign as one of the most complex and intellectually driven acts of resistance in American slavery. Her actions demonstrated that defiance could take forms far more subtle and devastating than open revolt. The remnants of the Caldwell estate, its crumbling foundations and overgrown graves, stand as a silent memorial to her legacy. Dinah's story endures as a testament to how intelligence, patience, and courage could transform the very tools of oppression into instruments of justice. This chilling tale reminds us that even within the darkest systems, resistance is never truly extinguished. It only waits for someone bold enough to ignite it. What do you think about this story? Do you believe every truth about Dinah's network was uncovered? Share your thoughts below, and if you want to hear more forgotten histories like this one, remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you in the next story.